Hello, everybody. This is The Lawyer Show. I'm your lawyer, Jeremy Rosenthal. And today my guest is attorney Penny Robe. She is co-counsel today. I'd like to begin today in a way that I have not done before. I'm going to start with a lawyer joke because I think it's going to be a decent lead-in for today's shenanigans, today's things. And so normally, I don't know, I have a very mixed feeling about lawyer jokes. Some of them, I don't know. I mean, some are funnier than others. Some are more true than others. I'll just launch into it because it's really not that good, and it's certainly not worth the buildup that I'm already giving it. So here's the joke. So a guy, there's a lawyer, and he's in his Lincoln Town car, and he's driving home one day, I don't know, for lunch, we'll say, and he's going by the mansion in Turtle Creek, which it is, as probably everybody who's watching knows, is just a really nice, fancy, ritzy, I don't know if it still is, really cool place. Very beautiful architecture, very beautiful landscaping. And so he's driving and he looks over and he sees in the grass, he sees a man eating the grass. He sees a man grabbing grass and eating it. He sees a man eating the grass. And the lawyer just, okay, what's this about? And he rolls his window down, says, "Sir, would you mind coming over here?" A guy walks over there. Lawyer says, what's going on? What's this about? Guy says, well, I'm hungry. And this is, I'm eating the grass because I'm hungry. And they put so much stuff in the, they take such a good care of this at this place that I eat, that it's, I can get nutrients here. So that's why I'm eating. And the lawyer's like, God, I can't. Yeah, this isn't good. He's like, well, I'm on my way home, sir, and I'm, would you get in the car. The man says, really? Are you sure? This would mean a lot to me if I'll work for food, I'll do whatever. And the lawyer's like, I can't let you out here. I can't let you do this. I can't let you eat. This is too sad. Man says, well, what about my family? And he says, he points in the field, and then there's his family out there. They're eating. Kids, mom, eating the shrubs, grass, all that stuff. And the lawyer's like, okay, all right. Fine. Everybody, get in. He's driving home, Lincoln Town car. This man and his family are thanking the lawyer profusely. Thank you. You are the kindest person. You have no idea how many people have driven by me, just ignored me, not even there. This is so terrible. Thank you. You're the kindest guy in the world. And the lawyer says, you know what? This isn't a problem at all. I've needed my yard to be mowed for a long time.
Oh, no.
At least I have one person that laughs. So this is why this is a tie-in. This is why it's a tie-in, because a lot of times I don't get to do much happy law. I'm a criminal lawyer. I don't get to do much happy law. When people come to me, their house, their proverbial house is on fire. And so that's why the public kind of feels like we sort of capitalize on misery. Yes? My co-counsel today, Penny Robe, does quite a bit of happy law. Not all. She's got a very well-rounded practice. She's got some amazing experience, but she gets to do happy law, which is things that don't necessarily always have to do with conflict. Things such as estate planning, things such as helping business owners start up their business, live out their dreams. You also do a lot of work helping out veterans. I'd like to introduce to you my co-counsel today, Penny Robe. So Penny, let's start with your practice. Give the audience just an overview of your practice.
All right. So my current practice mix is heavily guardianships right now. Guardianships are when somebody has lost the capacity to manage their own life.
I was talking about happy law here.
I know, right?
And then, yes, beforehand, you said that you had actually, in the last year, gotten quite a bit of guardianships, and that's a fact. We've never talked about guardianships on our show. And I'd love to get into that. Keep going. Sorry, I just cut you off.
Yeah, so it grew. It used to be about a third of my practice was the estate planning, probate, and guardianships all together. But the guardianship part has expanded so much in the last year or so that the others have shrunk. So it's not that same mix anymore. But the other areas, I'm still doing the stuff for small businesses. So if a new business wants to start, they can come in and talk to me, and we'll just talk about whatever they want to talk. What kind of entity should they be, in terms of partnership, corporation, LLC. Spoiler, never general partnership.
No,
that's always bad.
Always bad. Okay,
Yeah.
well let's get into that.
Sure.
Okay, what is a general partnership, and why is it always bad?
A general partnership is as opposed to a limited partnership. So a general partnership, the general means general liability. And so you have unlimited personal liability for anything that happens in the business. You have no personal protection from what happens. So one of the big purposes of having an entity at all is to provide personal protection for your own assets as the business owner. Mm-hmm. And if you are just one person and you do nothing, you're a sole proprietor, you have no protection for your assets. So that's where you want to maybe wrap an LLC around that, give yourself some liability protection. And partnerships, you personally have unlimited liability for your own actions and those of your partner.
Okay.
And so if you go into partnership with, like if you and I went into partnership and formed no entity, by default, it's a general partnership.
Okay.
So if you and I start a lawn mowing business and we don't make a plan and we just start let's go mow some lawns.
If we're hungry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, but we use mowers.
Oh, okay. We're not going to do it we're not going to do it the Turtle Creek style.
No. So
okay.
we maybe we hire employees to do some of the mowing even. Mm-hmm. So, and somebody does something horrible, with the mowing and causes damage. Maybe they, mow down a tree somehow. And there's a liability for that. In a general partnership, I'm going to be responsible for whoever did that, whether I had anything to do with it or not.
Okay.
So let's say that you hired somebody who clearly was incompetent and shouldn't have been hired. I don't know why you did that. But in a general partnership, my assets are on the line for you're making a bad decision.
I see. Okay.
And vice versa.
I see. Okay. So that's why you don't like the general partnership. But and I'm one of the things that I always get confused on is when we talk about general partnerships or limited partnerships, right? The limited refers to the liability,
right?
Not to the size of your say in the partnership.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, sort of. I mean, a limited partner does have limited management authority too.
Okay.
So that's where, the more likely answer is going to be an LLC that is taxed like a partnership.
A limited liability company.
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So never a general partnership.
Yes. Never.
Not ever.
Not ever.
Okay. Because I don't want to pay for, or you don't want to pay for the people that I hire that accidentally mow the wrong tree or child down.
Correct.
Okay. Future accountant always.
Right.
Anytime. Yeah. So, okay. All right. Keep going. So I cut you off there, but you were talking about business planning, guardianships that you do. Mm-hmm. And I also really want to talk a lot about your military experience because we've never had a JAG, Judge Advocate General. We've never had that come on the podcast and talk about that. So I do want you to talk to us about your experience with that.
Okay, sure. So, I have a pretty uncommon career path. Mm-hmm. So, when I got out of law school, I was a prosecutor. Not that uncommon. And then I
But
left.
you got rid of that as soon as you could.
I did it only 2 years, which is, as a lawyer,
That's
you
acceptable.
kind of don't want to do less than 2 years in a job because you look a little flighty, right? So I joined the JAG from that job. And my first duty station was McClellan Air Force Base in California, Sacramento area. I did short of 6 years active duty.
So you're from originally West Texas?
No, I'm from here.
You're from here? Okay.
I went to high school in Euless.
You went to high school in Euless. I see. And then you went to LCU, Lubbock Christian.
Yes.
And then Texas Tech for law.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was out there a decade between undergrad, law school, and then a couple of years as a prosecutor.
Okay. So you went from Tech to Plainview.
Yes.
Where you were a prosecutor, and we're going to circle back to that. And then from Plainview, Texas, you went to the JAG Corps. So you were recruited from civilian life. You didn't have prior military service.
I was not recruited at all.
Oh, okay.
but
They didn't.
but
Okay.
yes, I didn't have any prior military experience. But my dad had been in the Navy before he had children. My brother is retired from the Army Reserves. So we have a lot of military in the family, strong tradition of service. I'm Air Force. I, fortunately for me, was able to, when I was in Plainview, meet a woman who was a JAG in the Marine Corps, which is quite the unicorn. Statistically, only 5% of the Marine Corps are female, and much less JAG. But she gave me the straight skinny on each of the branches, so I could decide. I knew I wanted to be a JAG, but I didn't know which branch.
Well, the Air Force has, because we talked about this too. I'm a former Army person, right? I was in the field artillery, and it's very well known. It's very well known that the Air Force has the best cable channels. They have the best air conditioning.
Yes.
They have the best 5-star restaurants.
These are all true things.
So it makes perfect sense that somebody would want to be, if you're going to
pick.
If you're going to choose. So, okay, so she was a JAG officer in the Marine Corps.
Right.
Okay.
And she told me in the Marines, first of all, we just talked about the minimum amount of training you have to do. So for officer training, for the Navy and the Army, it would have been 6 weeks. For the Marine Corps, 1 full year.
To be in the JAG.
No, just to do officer
Just to do
training
officer
before
training.
any kind of JAG school.
Okay.
So 6 weeks each for Navy or Army, 1 full year for the Marine Corps. Air Force, 2 weeks. This seemed easy to me.
This was a no-brainer.
I mean,
when I was in
it's
the
not
Army,
the only factor. I just want to say, but
look, I'm with you. I when I was in the Army, I was in the field artillery, and I kind of, there's a couple times I flirted with being in the JAG Corps. I was already an officer, and so it was, and I asked about, well, what if I wanted to do Army JAG? And I remember asking the guy, am I a lawyer who just happens to be in the Army, or am I in the Army and I just happen to be a lawyer? And he said, you're in the Army. And I was like, okay, and by that time, I don't know, I was just kind of, I don't know.
Well, it is a difference too. So for the Marine Corps, there was no guarantee you'd get a billet, an assignment as a JAG, even if you went in as a lawyer as a JAG.
They'd be like, no, here's your weapon.
Right. And then, to be real, as a woman in the 90s, I was deciding this, and it was not that long after Tailhook scandal. And so for me, I was like, sorry, Dad, Navy's out for me. I don't want to be run down a gauntlet and have myself be groped along the way. I'm against that. And so the Marine Corps, 5% female. I mean, that has not gotten better, by the way. That's current numbers. It was worse back then. And so 15% overall women in all 4 branches, 20% is the Air Force.
Okay.
So it's very male dominated, but not quite as bad as the other branches. So that's a real thing,
Well,
And the Marine, so separate thing, Air Force, Navy, and Army all have a separate JAG Corps, And so for Air Force, it's a separate promotion chain too. I wasn't competing with a pilot for promotion.
What is JAG practice like? What does a military lawyer do from, I'll say in the Air Force, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. In the Army would have been probably slightly better, but.
So first, they are different by branch. So for the Air Force, at a base office, like Air Force Base, Staff Judge Advocate is in charge. That's the highest ranking JAG that's there. And then as somebody who was there as a junior person, you're going to have an assignment in the claims department maybe. So the military pays for our members to move. And when they move, their stuff gets damaged. They file a claim with the claims department in the JAG office. And it's as exciting as it sounds. There's junior enlisted people,
Sure.
paralegals like looking and being like depreciation and okay, your table's not worth $100, it's worth $20, stuff like that.
Okay.
And then they get a check for the damage. So that's the claims. And there's other claims. So when I was the claims officer as part of my assignment. I dealt with medical malpractice claims as well as not just the moving stuff. And then we had a hospital associated at Mather Air Force Base. So we did actually physician credentialing hearings. So we had this one physician who did not need to continue to be credentialed. He was having some serious issues. And I still do healthcare law. Like some of that has continued forward. Another part is military justice, courts martial. And so because I'd been a prosecutor previously, they started me in as that department. It's super different. Your jury is made up of people who are at least outranking you.
Right.
So if somebody's like a 3-year airman, like a E3 rank, then people on the jury have to be at least E3 with the same time in service plus a day or higher. By default, it's all officers.
I've heard, okay, so you're watching JP Kathy and the Crew Network. You can watch JP Kathy and the Crew between 7:30 and 9, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. This is the Lawyer Show. We are on between noon and 1 on Thursdays. I'm your lawyer, Jeremy Rosenthal. This is my co-counsel, Penny Robe. So, okay, picking up right there, very interdisciplinary. So anything that you can think of, any type of legal situation or problem that you can have the JAG officers, the JAG Corps can address.
Yes. It's in a way like a huge law firm that does everything.
Yeah.
And in a way, you can think of, there's like employment issues. So you do employment law. I learned copyright law because there were some copyright issues that came up. I had some environmental things I dealt with. We had we're in California, so we had more environmental than probably some other locations just because even though there's federal preemption, we're trying to comply with California rules too. The base is a federal enclave with separate federal jurisdiction, and we had McClellan had a huge civilian population, 3,000 active duty, 15,000 civilian employees.
Man, yeah, and so that's got to be a very complex, just a dynamic because you've got soldiers, airmen. Sorry. You've got service members who are living on base, who are living off base. They're getting, and from a criminal standpoint, they're getting in trouble on base. They're getting in trouble off base, where they may or may not be subject to the UCMJ.
You're always subject to the UCMJ if you're on active duty, regardless of location.
Okay.
100%. But for the civilians, it matters a great deal whether they're on base or off base, whether it's federal jurisdiction exclusively or state. So that was a thing for sure. But our military justice department, we only dealt with the active duty members. But anytime you're on active duty, you're subject to the UCMJ.
Okay.
So.
And it can be a big deal too because let's say even if it's not the service member themselves, it could be a dependent who is, okay, well, now this is my son, my adult son, or I don't know if adult sons would count or daughters would count, but my spouse, and we are going to go transfer and live on base somewhere else. These things sound like they can get extraordinarily complex, and we haven't even scratched divorces yet, because I'm sure that's that's just even more crazy.
Yeah, it's its own thing for sure. So, so when you join the military, you can retain your residency where you left. So I stayed a Texas resident when I was stationed in California. So I didn't have to pay California state income tax, which is nice. And I remained subject to jurisdiction of Texas for some things, but criminal, if my spouse had committed a crime, he didn't have the same protections of not full panoply that I had as an active duty member back then. They've actually changed the law since then, so he would be able to completely retain Texas residency. So if he committed a crime in California, though, he's going to get prosecuted in California, right? If it happened on base, then you're looking at, does the U.S. Attorney General care? Is it a big enough crime to matter? They don't really care about misdemeanors, You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
They got big fish to fry at the federal level, right?
Sometimes, you would hope. So, okay, what types of, how do you integrate it today? Because you practice, your office is in Plano. in Collin County, which is the center of the universe.
Amen.
I might add. That even being the case, we don't have any military bases particularly close by. Dallas, Fort Worth, we're not a military town. What types of things do you do that still involve military practice?
So, well, one of the things in the Air Force that you do that I didn't talk about is legal assistance. So all of the branches have legal assistance. The way the Air Force does it, everyone at the base office does part of the legal assistance duties. And so a couple of hours a week, I'm open for appointments that are made by, somebody else. And people come in and I will help them as a JAG with their personal civil legal matters. And that applies to active duty and dependents. And so I did literally thousands of wills when I was doing legal assistance. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we did them on a deployment line, which is where there's a group of military members who are going to deploy to somewhere in combat. And they go through the deployment line, and JAG is one of the stations. So they've got a place where they're checking their glasses to make sure they have the current prescription. They're making sure they got the uniform stuff. There's somebody from personnel flight to make sure their orders are in order, that they've got all their dependents properly listed. And one of the stops is JAG. Do you have a will? Mm-hmm. Do you need a power of attorney? And we would draft them right then. So I can draft a will pretty fast.
Okay.
Generally, I don't do that in the civilian world, though, because people need time to kind of let it sink in themselves,
Well, you did some high-profile wills here in Collin County.
Yes.
So everybody knows.
I cannot reveal that. You have to be the one to reveal that. Attorney-client privilege, right?
Oh, that's right.
I can't say.
So Penny may or may not have done my will and my wife's will. So
if you tell people, I can say yes, I did.
I'm not saying that she did, and I'm not saying that she didn't. And one thing that's cool about wills, and I did a few of them at a law school, but man, what's cool about them is I like that, and this is terrible, I like that nobody's going to grade my paper for like 40 years on them.
Or ever if they do a new one.
Or ever if they do a new one. And okay, but so getting back to the military. Okay, so you were talking about the will line, and then too, what I was also kind of wondering. So, and there's just a ton that you have integrated from your military practice to today. But I was also wondering, do you ever come up for instance, small business owner benefits for being prior military?
Oh, yeah.
Home loans, things like that. Talk a little bit about that type of stuff.
So this program's over now, so that makes it a little bit less exciting. But Texas had a thing for a few years where if you had a veteran-owned business, you didn't have to pay the filing fee to create the entity. And I think it ended in 2019. And for the first 5 years, you wouldn't have to pay the franchise tax if you owed it. So filing fee is $308.10. I do a lot of entity formations.
Okay.
$8.10. So that was waived, but you had to mail in the forms, you know. So there's stuff like that comes up quite often if you just you have to keep up with it, though. There's some good resources, though, like even military.com and some of those do a pretty good listing, and the Texas Veterans Commission keeps a pretty current list of those benefits that are there. But yes, there are lots of them all the time. The Hazelwood Act in Texas is amazing.
Okay.
Were you a Texas veteran? Were you in Texas when you joined?
I was. Okay. Well, yes and no. I went to military school in Roswell, New Mexico, but I was a member of the Texas Army National Guard. Mm.
It may or may not apply to you because I think there's a minimum time you have to do on active duty to get this.
Okay.
So don't get excited until you read up and see if it applies. But
I will tamp this down.
Okay. But for Texas veterans, meaning you were in Texas when you joined and you kept Texas as your home of record, and you're a Texas resident now, you can get 150 hours of higher education tuition free. And you can let your kid use it.
Okay.
Well,
you don't think I would want to do 150 hours more?
I was like, well, I could get an LLM and something boring, but no.
But if my kid can use it now,
that's the money part.
Of 100, and it doesn't have to be a state institution.
Yes, because it's a tuition waiver. It's not money.
Okay.
It's not money. There's no money for books or fees. It's not a stipend.
Well,
like
knowledge
the GI
is power.
Bill. Right. But like, yeah, if your kid's going to go to Texas Tech, guns up, they would be paying zero tuition, which is not nothing.
Yeah, that helps.
Pretty good.
That helps. Yeah, and okay, so and that's the Hazelwood Act.
Hazelwood Act. Now, a few years ago, they did have talk about doing away with it because it's costing the state a lot of money. But they're not talking about that. They didn't talk about that this session. They're talking about other stuff.
Yeah.
How they do.
They get they put out the hottest fire or the hottest
non-issue that they want to politicize.
The hottest.
Let's be real.
The hottest fire that they create.
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So, kind of talking again about. Do you do any type of translation from your JAG experience into your current practice? Do you do? Are there any divorces that sometimes even in Collin County we can have divorces, family issues that have military overtones?
Yes, actually, a lot of lawyers will bring me in to help if they have a military case where they need to divide the military retirement pay, because that's a very much a specialized area, and I can draft those. And I can also help if you are doing a divorce as an attorney and are like, what is this? And don't really know. I can explain acronyms, which is, military.
That's everything.
It is. I mean, I knew I was fully indoctrinated when I could speak a full sentence in acronym and know what I was saying, right?
So a quick funny story. So Judge Roach has he's got a program that's called Valor, VALOR, and it has to do with veterans who find themselves in the court systems. A lot of times because of combat-related mental injuries, PTSD, that type of stuff. And so Judge Roach was talking to me about this and kind of explaining it to me. And long story short, I sat there and he's a former Marine. And I thought to myself, I'm like, man, that's a great acronym. Like,
right?
That is good. And so I asked him, I'm like, how did you come up with that? And he was like, oh, it took a long time. so that to get the right, and we're big in my office on acronyms. We're big on, on initials and things like this. Our office policy manual, I've always wanted to call it. I've wanted to, and I don't know if we ever came up with one. Heidi, our office manager's here laughing. I've always wanted to have the acronym TORAH, TORAH, and so that as our manual for everything.
Oh, I was thinking Tora, the movie.
The movie, yes. Well, military,
Without
very
the
good.
H.
Yes. That.
But sure, that makes more sense actually. It's a good, the H makes more sense.
Yeah, so Torah as in the holy so
the holy
that
text,
way
absolutely.
when people are like, when there's a problem, like, Jeremy, how do we treat it when we have a client who says this and that and then this happens and then their case happens there, and I say, well,
check the Torah.
Have you read the Torah?
Yes.
Let's see what the Torah teaches us. But anyway, I don't know that we could ever fit that acronym. So this was a diversion. You're watching JP Kathy and the Crew Network. You can see JP Kathy and the Crew between 7:30 and 9, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. This is The Lawyer Show. We're on between noon and 1 on Thursdays. I'm your lawyer, Jeremy Rosenthal. My co-counsel today is attorney Penny Robe. So so now I had your practice a little bit wrong because I kind of felt like you were in many ways a general practitioner, a storefront lawyer. You've let me know that, and you've already said it today, within the last year, a lot of guardianship work. And guardianship work is very mysterious to, I think, many people. Right when I left the DA's office, Judge Copeland appointed me to a handful of guardianships, so I got to witness them firsthand. Talk to everybody about what a guardianship is. What does it mean in English?
Sure. A guardianship is where a person has some kind of incapacity that leaves them unable to manage their own either person or finances or both. And so maybe you have a disabled child who turns 18. In that case, you're probably going to need to get a guardianship of the person so you can continue to help that child with their medical decisions and where to live and things of that. Maybe apply for benefits on their behalf, things like that, depending on the level of incapacity we're talking about. So if you have somebody who's nonverbal, really incapacitated, you're going to need a guardianship. If you have somebody who is, like people with Down syndrome, there's quite a range of ability. And so you may have somebody who could do supported decision making and they don't need a full guardianship. There's also people who have a loss of capacity, like, maybe they've developed Alzheimer's or some other sort of dementia causing thing. And so guardianships come into play there.
And so, okay, a couple things too, because you mentioned something earlier that we've never really talked about as well, which is a power of attorney, which becomes kind of relevant in sort of these conversations. So to break it down to its base element, so let's say you have a senior citizen oftentimes who they maybe have moments of lucidity, maybe not, maybe they're losing their faculties. A guardian is somebody who basically takes not so much physical control.
It depends. It can be that too. It depends. Okay. Sorry, lawyerly, but it depends. Is always, So power of attorney though. So let's say for example.
And I know I'm conflating and confusing topics, but go ahead.
So let's say I'm doing some estate planning for somebody, right? They come in, it's a husband and wife. The wife has had some TIAs, some mini strokes. But she's just slow processing, but she's mostly fine. But she's slow processing and he knows she shouldn't be in charge. So she should give him a power of attorney. So mostly if they've been married a long time, he probably can do everything she can do anyway, but there's some things that it has to be her. So if she gives him a power of attorney, they might avoid the need for a guardianship altogether. Exception being if she gets more dementia, if she has another stroke and it leaves her saying yes to everything, then you need a guardianship to take away that ability to sign contracts. I mean, I had one where I was court appointed to represent the proposed ward, the person who is, and she was saying yes to everything, including putting a new roof on the house they had for sale, buying solar panels for the same house. I mean, if somebody called her and could get through to her, yes was the answer. Well, that's bad, So if you do a guardianship, then you're taking away her ability to sign those contracts,
right? To
agree to those things,
right? So and so a power of attorney survives incapacity.
As long as it's drafted correctly, yes.
Okay, well, but isn't and correct me if I'm wrong, because I've always thought that the durable statutory power of attorney was made by, in other words, the law said it has to look like this.
So there is a statutory durable power of attorney form for Texas. You can have a power of attorney that's not durable, so you need to make sure it has the right language. These were part of what we did for people deploying, right? So this was in the 90s. You didn't have web bill pay even. Right? So you had to have somebody pay your bills while you were deployed. You had to have somebody handle all your stuff. So you would give a power of attorney, but maybe it wasn't durable because we're not expecting incapacity, but also if they became incapacitated, maybe you have a different plan. So I have a puppet show I did for this. So okay, so in the military,
you know what?
Durable,
and you may or may
non-durable,
not have, okay,
right?
I forgot about this completely. You may or may not have done your will puppet show for my spouse and I when we did our wills.
I probably didn't, to be real, because I always do durable.
I remember a puppet show of some type. I remember a puppet show, and you are the only one ever. Okay, so let's make sure that let's have the puppet show.
All right, so this is you. This is your ability to make decisions, enter into contracts, things of that nature. You can give someone else the same power that you have, but not more power than you have. So if somebody comes in to see me and they're already a little bit out of it, they can only give this much power because they don't have their full power anymore. So if somebody comes in and they're already incapacitated, they can't give a power of attorney because they're already incapacitated. They don't have the power themselves anymore, okay? If I give you power of attorney and I make it durable, you have this power, and this power stays even if I lose my capacity. There's also a thing called a springing power of attorney where I give you this power only if I lose capacity, and then it's like only coming into being if you lose your capacity. So they're never both up at the same time. The springing kind, though, you have to get a physician to certify in writing to your incapacity. So in the scenario with the married couple, I wouldn't do springing. I'd be like, if you don't trust him now, We have other issues, so springing doesn't save you or help you.
Okay, because fascinating stuff. Because yeah, no.
Yay, puppet show.
We'll do
It helps though, doesn't it?
Oh, it's sure. And at your office, are there actual puppets? Do we have?
I do have a boxing nun puppet, but I don't bring it out for this.
Boy, we really missed out today. We'll post pictures on the website. Do we have a website yet? No. Okay, so
you can Google boxing nun and probably find a
boxing
picture.
nun, and okay, man. All right, this is quite an experience today. So, and to get back to the power of attorney and the durable, because this can be very confusing stuff, and it can be a lot of times we beat ourselves up because it sounds like it ought to be kind of simple, but it's really not.
It's not, and that's why we say attorney at law, because the person you get power of attorney is your attorney in fact, even though they're not a lawyer.
Ah, yes, I
a lot of lawyers don't know.
Well, this one does now.
Yeah.
So there you go. Yeah, and so a power of attorney, in talking about the springing one, right? That says that if I get hit by a train, my wife can go sign contracts.
As long as you're alive.
As long as I'm still, if I'm still alive.
Death means both puppets die. Okay. Like there's no more power. The power of attorney dies with the grantor.
Right. So, but in kind of working it back to guardianships. So when, let's say we have, and this is some of the things that I experienced. So you would have, let's say, dad who is in his 70s, unfortunately afflicted with whatever type of incapacity that he's coming up with, 70s, 80s, 90 years old. A lot of kids who are adults, and some of whom are not as nice as others to one another, and we want dad to sign this, and we want dad to sign that. And dad, you always promise me the house. Well, why don't we just make sure that your will says this, right?
Right.
And that's where things get really, really messy, and that's where a court could step in and say, Penny, you are, and I don't know that that's an ad litem, more so, or am I getting that confused?
So there is a guardian ad litem, there's a guardian, and there's an attorney ad litem. Okay. In every guardianship case, you're proposing someone to be that guardian. And Texas requires training to be a guardian. My big client is a private professional guardian group, so they have special extra criteria they meet. But if you were wanting to be a guardian for a family member, you would have to do this JBCC training, joint. Oh crap!
They need a vowel in there. They need a vowel in there, and they can talk to Judge Roach about how to fit vowels into their acronyms. But keep going. Judicial
Branch Certifying Commission. Yeah.
Okay.
So they monitor guardianships and all of that. There was coincidentally, after John Oliver did a show on guardianships and featured one of our Texas judges, the legislature coincidentally put in some of these reforms that are all good reforms, in my opinion. I think the training is a good thing. That went into effect in 18 or 19. I guess it would have had to be 19 if they were doing it, right? They don't mean 18. So there you go.
That's right.
So
not unless they have to redistrict.
Right. So there's training and stuff the guardian does. A guardian ad litem is going to be an attorney who has the certification to do guardianship cases. And they can be appointed as needed, but not always. An attorney ad litem is always appointed for the proposed board, the person who's incapacitated, allegedly. And the attorney ad litem has to be certified in this, and the applicant's attorney has to be certified in guardianship law. And the attorney ad litem represents the ward. Now, if the ward is, like I was saying, nonverbal, like I was appointed once to a ward who had microencephalopathy. So he had the tiny head, birth defect. He didn't speak at all. And so you can imagine there was no communication. And I told the court, I can only tell you that clearly this person cannot manage their own finances or where to live, but I couldn't give my clients' desires because I couldn't communicate them.
I see.
So in a situation where you cannot ascertain that ward's wishes, if you have any scent of something off, you would ask the court to appoint a guardian ad litem as well.
Okay.
Or if as an attorney ad litem, my client, the ward, is directing me to do something that is crazy pants, to use the technical term, you can also ask for the guardian ad litem there, because the guardian ad litem is acting in the ward's best interests without regard to what the ward wants.
Mm-hmm. I see. Okay. By the way, I just learned a new way to put crazy that doesn't involve profanity. I'm probably going to use that.
Crazy pants is a good one.
In the future. That's a good one. Another one I heard, I had somebody tell me this a year or so ago, and I've tried to incorporate this. They said, we're going to sue the potatoes out of somebody. And I'm like, that works too. You know, we can say these things sometimes in family-friendly ways. So, all right. And so the guardianship and the attorney ad litem, guardians ad litem, they are essentially structured to protect people who don't have the capacity to make the decisions.
Right.
And so sometimes these can be easy, sometimes they can be hard, and a lot of times they have more to do with the personalities around those folks than they do the people themselves. Because again, you know, I saw situations where there were very aggressive children, spouses that were very, well, dad wants this and dad wants that. And so everybody is trying to convince me that they need to be the one making the decisions for dad or mom.
That is where the private professional guardian can come in, actually. If the court doesn't find any of the usual family member people to be appropriate, or they don't qualify for some reason, because to be a guardian, you can't have ever been found incapacitated yourself. You can't have any prior felony convictions or crimes involving moral turpitude. Always a good phrase to trot out. That's a crime involving dishonesty.
But aren't all crimes of moral turpitude?
I mean,
I'm kidding. It's actually a very specific legal classification, but yeah.
I don't know how, back when I was a prosecutor and there were hot checks still.
Right.
That's a crime of moral turpitude to pass your hot check at Wendy's for $3,
Really?
Yeah.
That was a crime of moral turpitude?
Crime of moral.
Really?
It's theft by check.
Well, theft by check, yes, but okay, so there's a Class C, and I'm sorry we're diverting this again.
Okay.
So there's a Class C misdemeanor of issuance of a bad check. That does not involve intent. So in other words, it's a Class C now, but theft by check is theft.
When I was doing it in 93 to 95, there was only theft by check. Okay. So I'm glad they've updated the penal code.
I'm much young. I mean, I was a prosecutor all the way in 2003. Is when I joined the DA's office. But we were very. They were pretty aggressive about prosecuting it, but they had the choice of filing an IBC, insufficient balance or insufficient whatever, or now some.
I think that's excellent. I wish that had been available, because I mean. I bounced a check when I was prosecuting those, and I was like, "Oh my God, I've just committed a crime of moral turpitude for a Wendy's burger,"
Yeah, that's why you. Well, okay, and so here's a tidbit too. Here's a little bit of knowledge.
And the statute is passed on that judicial confession I just made there.
Well,
right?
if it's a continuing course of conduct, if you've
clearly not
bounced any checks since then, okay, you don't have to answer that. You have the Fifth Amendment. So, okay, but and just another tip for lawyer or an explanation. Yes. I think. So when we were prosecuting theft by check, the only way we could prove it, depending on where you wrote the check, right? So if you write the check to your best buddy who's going to go to court and say, that's him, that's a problem. But let's say you go to Kroger, let's say you go to Tom Thumb, let's say you go to Brookshire's or wherever, and you write the check there. Well, there's no way that the cashier can ever really identify you. Because they're not going to say that was the one who wrote the bad check for $37.14, and there you go. And the way they would do it is we would have to prove up the habit and routine evidence. I'm in the habit and the routine of every single check that I do. I look at the person's ID. I write their driver's license number on the check, and then I match it to their face, and that's how I can identify this person. Which of course they never do anyway. But that's why the clerk at the grocery store people used to write checks at grocery stores.
And the fast food places took checks back then.
Really?
In the 90s.
Well, a lot of talk about the 90s when things were footloose and fancy free in America.
Well, ATMs didn't come out till like the 80s.
Okay.
I'm olden, apparently. Older than you.
I bounced a check to Kinko's for $3.10.
Heidi bounced a check to Kinko's for how much?
$3.10.
I don't think anybody's from Kinko's is watching this. Is there?
I paid for it. I went back and paid for it.
You went
She
back and
redeemed,
paid for it.
yeah.
I was copying the testament.
I'm sure she's past the statute of limitations.
When I was a prosecutor story, they used to send us to JP court. In fact, JP of JP, Kathy, and the crew, I was sent to his court to prosecute. By the way, you're watching JP, Kathy, and the Crew Network. It's 45 minutes after we started, so that's time for. You're watching JP, Kathy, and the Crew Network. You can see JP, Kathy, and the Crew between 7:30 and 9 Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. This is the Lawyer Show. We're on between noon and 1 on Thursdays. I'm your lawyer, Jeremy Rosenthal. My co-counsel today is Penny Robe. So back to JP of JP, Kathy, and the Crew. He was a justice of the peace in Plano, and what they would do is the DA's office would file a lot of these IBC cases in front of him, and he would have jurisdiction. He came, and for whatever reason, the DAs prior to the one I worked for, the elected district attorneys had a no dismissal policy on anything. I know. It was the 90s.
Crazy pants.
And they would not dismiss anything for any reason. And so when I would get there, Judge Payton would say, all right, Mr. Rosenthal, here's these boxes of way old cases. And take a look at them. And I would go through there and I saw, and this would have been 2003, 2004, somewhere in there. I would see hot checks from the 80s that were still on the books as being prosecuted, and so I would dismiss those because I was like, I'm sure Domino's wants their $19.87 back from some fellow we have no clue is dead or alive. So I felt like that was in the best interest of justice.
I am with you 100% on that.
To do that, and I apologize to Domino's and to anybody else who I dismissed those cases.
20-year-old cases.
The 20-year-old cases. So, okay, so we're going to transition one last time here with you because I do want to talk about some of your experiences as a prosecutor in you said Plainview, which is Hale County.
Right. So I was assistant district attorney for the 64th and 242nd district courts, which covered Hale and Swisher counties.
In case you don't know that out there, everybody.
I don't know if they still have the same geographic, but that was it at the time. And my boss was Terry McEachern. Does that name mean anything to you? He was the district attorney.
No.
Oh, well, he was the DA when the scandal happened in Tulia.
Okay.
But I was in the JAG by then.
Yes. So, when you mentioned Tulia to me before we started, I kind of knew what that was. Talk about what the Tulia, Texas, however you want to characterize it, scandal, debacle. Talk about
travesty of justice.
It certainly was. It certainly was a travesty. Talk about what happened.
So in Tulia, the sheriff, Larry Stewart, and the DA approved doing this confidential informant kind of sting for drugs. And this one person was the confidential informant, and he did all of these affidavits that they used as the basis to indict. So I don't know the percentages. I didn't brush up, but it was a huge proportion of all the black people in Tulia. And they did a huge raid and arrested all the people all at once. And they were later, and there were a lot of convictions. And it was based on this one person's testimony. And then they were later able to prove unequivocally that he'd been not where he said he was, that he'd been lying, that he was saying he was more than one place at the same time. I mean, if you looked at all of them together, it was very clearly not kosher, not okay. So those got overturned, and that was, in a nutshell, the Tulia, Swisher County. Did the FBI
get involved and federal agencies get involved to review the conduct of the officials?
The ACLU is who initially came in and brought it all to light. And then, yes, there
Mm-hmm.
was federal help to also deal with it.
And what ended up happening to the folks that were not the ones that I know that they had their convictions overturned, and I don't know if there was any additional remedy for them, but was anybody punished as a result from the law enforcement standpoint or from some of the official standpoint?
The confidential informant, I don't think he was prosecuted or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up because
Okay.
it was, like I said, after I left. I know Terry McEachern recently died, but I mean, he was still practicing law until his death. He didn't get disbarred over it or anything like that, for sure. He was doing other, he wasn't the prosecutor after a certain point, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he resigned even.
And not a lot of public demand to remove him out there
No.
over this, unfortunately. Okay. So you also had some experiences. So you tried capital murders in
Yes.
Hale County, Texas. And so in your short time there's a lot of killings that happen out there.
There was the weekend I was moving in to start my job. There was a capital murder. There was a mother-son owner of a convenience store over on the black part of town because Plainview was still segregated by fact, if no longer allowed to be by law. And they were doing very expensive check cashing and things like that in that poor part of town, since poverty and
Yeah.
being black went hand in hand for sure at that point in history. And so the three who did it confessed, and they said, let's go kill the Howells and rob them. So there was the aggravating factor was the robbery at the same time.
So
And,
and so everybody knows capital murder is basically murder plus another felony.
yes,
That's not murder.
right.
Okay.
Now, I will say, first of all, this was 1993, and we had like a new laptop that had this thing called Windows that was new, right? But so there was this new feature where you could have cases where you could search them
Okay.
and not have to just read in the books. That
No,
was new.
That was a big deal, right?
And so since I was the youngest, they had me read all that stuff on there. So anyway, at that point in time, I had read every capital murder case in Texas.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It was a lot.
We lead the planet in that. So
It was a lot. And so I kind of got a feel for like what should be an aggravating factor. And like technically robbery is enough, but like this was not something outrageous, you know. I mean, that's just, I guess I'm getting into my opinion a little bit.
Well, did they seek the death penalty?
Oh yeah.
They did. So, because there are some capital cases where you don't necessarily have to, and this may not have been the case back then. We have what are called mini caps these days, which are capital murders where the sentence would be life in prison.
No, that was available, but they didn't.
Okay, and they didn't opt for. They said let's put them on death row.
Right.
Did they were successful?
They got the conviction, but I have followed the cases, and none of the three of them were actually executed. Of those three,
Okay.
there was another murder where these two guys beat the other guy to the point of death and then drove around with him callously until he died. And that both of those have those trials, and then the third one was a guy who broke into a older lady's house. She was like in her 60s.
The Plainview Chamber of Commerce isn't going to be too happy with this
Right.
with this
This was all
podcast.
within a 2-year period.
I doubt anybody out there is listening to this from Plainview. Maybe if you are, email in. We have Facebook Live if you're in Plainview and
Want to defend its honor.
want
Yeah.
to defend its honor.
But this guy broke into her house to steal money for drugs, and then he killed her and raped her dead body. That's pretty capital. He didn't actually appeal his conviction. He
No.
confessed to the whole thing, and I think he wanted to be you know, you can do a plea and have death. So he had
Yeah.
a trial, but he's like, meh, I did it.
Okay.
Kind of, and he never appealed it. And he was, as fast as it's possible to do, he was executed.
How fast would that be?
It took a few years.
Okay. I want to say there's a show I watched. It's been a while. I think it was called Oz. You ever see the show Oz?
Mm-mm.
This is
I've heard of it, but
this is like in the early not early 90s, early 2000s, and they had like a guy commit a capital murder and was executed in the same show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no.
I will say,
there's no way.
we did a individual voir dire.
Mm-hmm.
So voir dire is where you question the jury to make sure nobody's disqualified, that they qualify to serve. And in capital cases, you do individually. So you talk to each potential juror one-on-one. And so I wasn't doing the questioning. I was the note taker as the junior attorney, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this juror is asked, can you participate in a case where there's an execution? And he's like, well, I'm busy this weekend. I mean, he like really thought he, as the juror, was going to be pulling that lever on the electric chair, and like this weekend.
That guy.
The defense struck him,
Oh,
which I think was wise.
do you think? Yeah, boy,
Wow.
I wonder if that guy moved to Collin County and got jury service here. I mean, Texas has them, huh?
Right?
West Texas. There's a provision. I always joke with folks. There's a provision anytime we're pleading guilty, which is not much, because Jeremy doesn't plead. I'm the toughest lawyer. Yeah, that's right. That's another thing that we have to do as lawyers. We have to tell everybody how tough we are, right? Even
I mean, not me, because what I do.
well, no, you do happy law.
Well, and
a lot of it.
you don't need somebody to be tough in a guardianship. You kind of want them to be compassionate. And
Yeah. So, now I'm the toughest lawyer that I know, and I eat nails for breakfast, and I can do a million lawyer push-ups. Okay, so let's get that clear. If I have a client who demands to plead guilty, and I say, okay, fine. Happens. So what happens is there's a provision in there that says that you have 10 days to prepare for trial, and that provision is in there so we don't turn into Iraq, right? That's where you get arrested day one, and day two you're on trial. Okay, but that happens, and I joke with folks. I'm like, this only applies in Midland.
I'm gonna say,
because it happens.
Oh yeah, let me just say. So I was the misdemeanor prosecutor for Hale County. So we were the district attorney, but there was no county attorney. So I was the acting county attorney for Hale County. I did all the misdemeanors. And so I'd get the reports from the weekend folly,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a dry county. So you'd have, things like people were transporting, oh, your truck bed's low, it's full of beer, right? Because we're going to sell it illegally. Yeah, 1993. So I'm doing this misdemeanor complaints. I got the officer signing them. And then we're arraigning on Tuesday from the weekend. And we would do the arraignment. You've been charged with DWI, first time. How do you plead? And they say guilty. And we're like, all right. And the judge would say, what do you recommend? And I had a standard. And that guy would be sentenced right then.
Yeah, it still happens.
Representing himself.
It still happens. People, and where I see it happen, unfortunately, a lot are on Class C misdemeanors, which are punishable by fine only, but those can still hurt. Domestic violence ones, and people will enter
DWI. I mean, come on.
Well, that's
like its own, and it was already
well,
special.
that's a Class B misdemeanor.
At minimum.
And you do have the right to account. You don't have necessarily there's Supreme Court precedents for it. It's Gideon v. Wainwright, which is your right to counsel. It's your right to court-appointed counsel, and it's a huge, huge deal. But you do not have the right to counsel if jail is not possible. So on a Class C misdemeanor, even though it could be a domestic violence charge, even though it could be theft, even though it could be things that cause you real headaches in professional licensing and other parts of your life, you don't necessarily have the right to have court-appointed counsel. You do on a Class B misdemeanor, because that involves punishment up to 180 days in jail. So yes, it is even more of a no-no. I mean, it's still a no-no to have somebody plead guilty to, we're going to pick you up for public intoxication. The ways some cities get around it is they say, you enter a conditional guilty plea. If you don't show up to court, we'll just take your bond money. Well, that's just as illegal. Same thing. So I'm always curious to hear, we think that, and I've managed to offend parts of West Texas today, Midland, Plainview, all of these things I'm fine doing. Now, I'm a Texas Tech guy too still, but, it's crazy to me that, we may as well have, it sounds like Judge Roy Bean out there right?
Right. And also constitutional county court, not a lawyer as the judge.
Yeah, you have it. That's right. There are courts there are courts out there that have a guy who's presiding over jailable offenses,
Right. No degree required at all.
or a girl,
Person.
a person. Want to get the pronoun right.
Just say person.
Person.
It avoids a world of trouble.
Which is not what we were able to do successfully on this episode of the Lawyer Show, which I am sorry to say that this has been probably as successful as we've done in the Lawyer Show. So I think that wraps it up for our hour that we had today. Big thanks to my co-counsel today, Penny Robe.
Thank you.
And you can catch her puppet show on her website.